that the State Solicitor's Office wants to sue me over broadcasting what I'm broadcasting about psychiatric practice, calling for a Royal Commission in criminal investigation into deaths in psychiatric hospitals over the past 50 years, because we've got enormous problems that have been going on and on and on and on and on, and I've been talking about it with the public, and they have a right to know, and I have a right to free political speech and communication. And there is the front page of the Herald, Saturday, June the 23rd, 2012. It's just a few days after I received this threatening letter. Fremantle Herald does some good reporting. Royal Commission call for Alma deaths. Royal Commission call for Alma death. That's the psychiatric facility in Fremantle Hospital, where this article exposes a tip of the iceberg of the amount of death and corruption going on in relation to this issue. A former chair of the Australian Mental Health Council wants a Royal Commission held into the appalling record of deaths of patients at Fremantle's Alma Street Psychiatric Unit. In a letter in today's Herald, Keith Wilson, WA's Health Minister in the Lawrence Labor government, calls on Labor leader Mark McGowan to commit to a Royal Commission in the event he wins next year's state election. However, Mr McGowan has rejected the call, expressing his preference for a full coronial inquiry first. Mark McGowan is not going to do anything about this. A full coronial inquiry is going to prove nothing. There's 33 deaths in 1 year in this psychiatric facility in Fremantle. These people are dead. A coronial inquiry is not going to even scratch the surface. The benefits of a coronial inquiry probably will be the toxicology reports. But maybe it's too late. These people are already dead. So what we need is a full-scale Royal Commission, not just for Fremantle, but for the entire state of Western Australia going back 50 years. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So these politicians are just as responsible as the psychiatrists, because they've been letting this go on and on and on. It's too late for these politicians. They haven't done anything about it. They're trying to cover it up, and we'll see. They're trying to cover it up. Mr Wilson, a long-time Fremantle resident whose adult son suffers schizophrenia, well, your son doesn't suffer from schizophrenia, because schizophrenia is a political, sociological, subjective invention that was invented in 1911, and it's totally political and sociological. So, that's my professional view on that. Says it's highly unlikely the Barnett government will commit to a Royal Commission, saying it has form on acting only in the wake of adverse publicity. So the current Premier Barnett won't order a Royal Commission because his politicians are involved in covering it up as well. So they're all involved. The 59 politicians in the lower house are covering this up, and it's been going on for a long time. So he says WA's mental health system has suffered a catastrophic system failure compounded by a failure in transparency and accountability. Well, it's not a catastrophic system failure, it's identifiable human beings who murder citizens with their treatments, and that psychiatrist, the chief psychiatrist, is mostly responsible. That they've been murdering citizens throughout the world for 200 years with their treatments. So it's not a systematic failure, it's human beings treating, death doctors treating other human beings with treatments that cause death, result in premature death, and also induce suicide. And that's what the research data is showing, research evidence. He says a much higher level inquiry will be needed to fix the entrenched system failures at all levels that have resulted in these catastrophic outcomes, the Atfield Street resident writes. It is not likely that a government in office will commit to such a high-level inquiry, in fact, a Royal Commission. Will the opposition, through its leader, make such a commitment in the event that his party were to become the government? No, he's already said no. You see? All 59 of them are covering it up. They are. They don't have any accountability, no transparency, no responsibility, no moral wisdom, no true leadership skill, no courage and no integrity. So why do voters put their faith in these people? They should not be putting their faith in them at all, because they've failed. Such a concentration of preventable deaths in any other area of health care would have led to a widespread public outcry. Mr McGowan has committed Labor to a coronial inquiry if it wins the election, and this week left the door open to a Royal Commission if that inquiry does not provide the families with adequate answers. Well, it's not going to provide adequate answers because people's family members and friends get murdered by psychiatrists. And that's the truth. And it's been going on for a very long time. And if you look back 50 years, I think the figure is probably going to be about 10,000 people, at least. And coronial inquiry is totally not good enough at all. Further avenues of inquiry could be pursued, he acknowledged. Well, he's involved in covering it up. That's my view, because it's been going on and on and on and on. And if they don't want to take responsibility, they want to take accountability, they don't want to do research and investigate. Look at the draft mental health bill of 2011. It is eugenics. It's targeted children. It's absolutely disgraceful. Mr McGowan has committed Labor to a coronial inquiry if it wins the election, and this week left the door open to a Royal Commission if that inquiry does not provide the families with adequate answers. Further avenues of inquiry could be pursued, he acknowledged. WA Mental Health Minister Helen Morton says Fremantle Hospital reported 33 mental health patient deaths from the April the 1st, 2011 to March 31st, 2012. That's 1 year, 33 dead people in one hospital in Western Australia. That's one hospital in 1 year. That's not all the hospitals. Greylands would be horrifically worse. And there's inquiries going on in the eastern states where deaths have been reported in Victoria, for example. Just 4 were investigated by Chief Psychiatrist Rowan Davidson, whose report is now under lock and key with Miss Morton refusing to release it. She says families of the deceased may receive censored versions. See, they're covering it up. In addition, Rowan Davidson investigated 4, yet he must have known that there were 33 deaths in that facility. Yet he didn't tell the Parliament. He didn't disclose them. Why weren't those 33 deaths disclosed? And why earlier? And why was it only 4 of those deaths investigated by the chief psychiatrist? So they're covering it up. The chief psychiatrist is covering it up. The courts are covering it up. The judges, the politicians are covering it up. They just want to cover this up, and they can't cover it up. That's why there needs to be a Royal Commission. And any politician of any integrity in this situation will be saying a full-scale Royal Commission. And that when I get elected to the seat of Willagee, that's exactly what I'll be pushing for it to go back 50 years. It'll be the largest Royal Commission this state has ever had, and probably ever will again. WA Mental Health Shadow Leanna Ravlich describes Rowan Davidson's tightly constrained inquiry as Caesar investigating Caesar. She notes Helen Morton's, that's the Minister for Mental Health, figures do not include patients discharged up to a month before their deaths. So people have been discharged and they have committed suicide because psychiatric drugs cause death, premature death, and they also induce suicide in people, and that's documented particularly in the United States. So how can a person, taxpayer-funded government employee, a psychiatrist, Rowan Davidson, investigate 4 deaths knowing that there's been 33 people who have died and not be responsible and accountable for insisting that these deaths be investigated, or that that other deaths are investigated? Well, they've got under lock and key in the Parliament, and its censored versions will be given to families. Well, they see, they just want to cover it up. They just want to cover it up. And it needs to be full-scale Royal Commission. It needs to be across the whole state of Western Australia. It needs to go back in all facilities, closed ones as well, facilities that are closed, and you can get the records from various places, various sources. I know how to get those records, and but what they're going to do is they're going to start destroying records. So there has to be a whole range of ways where records can be source of records can be utilised, and there needs to go back 50 years because we're talking about thousands of people. And we've got the compounded problem of, well, this Royal Commission needs to extend to the Mental Health Commission. Eddie Bartnick, one of the people responsible for drafting the draft Mental Health Bill 2011, should be remanded in custody because it's eugenics, it's murder, it's genocidal, it's targeted at children. It's got to extend, the Royal Commission's got to extend to the Mental Health Commission, it's got to extend to the Mental Health Review Board, that's for involuntary, that they've got locked up. They've got locked up about 1,500 people against their will, and they released 58 of them last year, or whatever it was the year before. You see, they just lock people up against their will. Now, how many people of those people have died? And it's got to extend to the State Administrative Tribunal, who's involved in stealing people's assets and money and controlling their assets and money. Also the Public Advocate, who's helping the government do it, and also the Public Trust, who is controlling millions of dollars of other people's assets and money and forcing them into homelessness and poverty. And the State Administrative Tribunal has been doing that for a long time. So that Royal Commission needs to extend to that. How many have they done it to? Who are they? The fact that probably half of them won't have been in hearings when they did it, and that they're living in dire poverty, and they're either homeless, in prison, in psychiatric facilities, or they're dead, or they're living in a community facility, where they may be just living. So they have engaged in, the government authorities involved, in my view, have engaged in crimes against humanity across the world, because they do this across the world, and I sure am going to try and do something about it in Western Australia. If I'm elected to the seat of Willagee, then I will push very, very, very vigorously for a Royal Commission into this entire practice, and in particular the deaths in psychiatric hospitals going back 50 years. And we're going to have to look at prosecutions as well, because there are people that are dead. You know, this is horrific what's happened. And I'm not going to bear the burden of this anymore, because the public has to be responsible also for helping justice for these victims and justice for the families as well. Prove to the public that the draft mental health bill has certain sections of it, genocidal, engaging in eugenics. For example, non-urgent medical treatment under the Guardianship Administration Act, they've got provision in there, sterilisation, that a guardian cannot consent to sterilisation, but that chief psychiatrists can consent, can give informed consent to a person who doesn't have the capacity. But this is what they do, they attack the capacity of citizens and people like David, who does have the ability to work and, you know, operate machinery and drive a car and look after his financial affairs and go to a job and interact with people. They claim that he doesn't have consent, but they're drugging him so badly over 15 years now they're claiming he has an intellectual disability, which is total rubbish. What they've done is they've destroyed his capacity by drugging him and drugging him and drugging him and drugging him with chemical compounds over a 15-year period. And that's what they do. They're first-class criminals, these people. They should be all rounded up and locked up to protect society, to protect families, to protect children, to protect the vulnerable, protect people. They are really criminal, what they're doing. And this mental health bill is worse than the current Act, 1996 Act, because it specifically targets children. Division 3, sterilisation procedure. Sections from sections 208, sterilisation procedure, subsection 1. A sterilisation procedure is the provision of medical or surgical treatment that is intended to make a person or to assure a person is permanently infertile. Subsection 2. A sterilisation procedure does not include the provision of medical or surgical treatment that is not intended to make a person or to ensure a person is permanently infertile, but incidentally has or may have that result. So they can deliberately sterilise someone, and they can accidentally sterilise someone. Section 209, requirements for sterilisation procedure. This is for children. A person must not perform a sterilisation procedure on a person who has a mental illness, and the concept of mental illness is highly subjective. So in their new DSM-5, for example, they're trying to claim that a person with a dirty shirt has a mental illness. You see, it's political, sociological, it's nothing to do with medicine. And in fact, under their new DSM, they can label every human being on the planet as mentally ill. That's how political it is. It's just the whole human race. They will label mentally ill so that they can do whatever they want to people. A. If the person is a child who does not have sufficient maturity or understanding to make reasonable decisions about matters relating to himself or herself, the family court has authorised the sterilisation procedure to be performed. So they can go to a family court for a child and get the family court, a judge or magistrate, to order a sterilisation of a child. Subsection B, if the person 1 is a child who has sufficient maturity and understanding to make reasonable decisions about matters relating to himself or herself, or 2 has reached 18 years of age and has the capacity required to give informed consent to the sterilisation procedure being performed. The person has given informed consent to it being performed. If the person has reached 18 years of age but does not have the capacity required by section 12 to give informed consent to the sterilisation procedure being performed, the person enduring guardian or guardian has given consent. So it's got nothing about the parents here, and also basically they are saying of any age, there's no age specific. To section 209A, if the person is a child who does not have sufficient maturity and understanding to make reasonable decisions, the family court. And if the person B is a child who has sufficient maturity and understanding to make reasonable decisions about matters relating to himself or herself, so that's a child of any age who they declare has sufficient maturity and understanding, can consent to their own sterilisation. See how evil that is? That is just, who would ever think of sterilising anyone? It's eugenics. It is absolutely eugenics, and that's the sort of thing they did in the Second World War to the Jews and the concentration camps. And the people who carried out the Nazis' genocidal policies in the Second World War were in the majority psychiatrists. They started with passive violence, which was starvation, and then it intensified to lethal injections, and then it intensified to systematic gassing and cremation. And the sterilisation that was conducted on Jews and Christians and black people and gay people and all the people that they locked up because for political reasons. They had an enormous, huge, widespread sterilisation program as well, the psychiatrists during the Second World War. And it was mostly the psychiatrists that did the work that carried out the genocidal policies of the Nazis. If you look at the research, if you look at what the historians are saying, particularly in the United States, what the historians are saying, then that is absolutely true. So yeah, they want to sterilise children that they label as mentally ill. But what they'll do is, in the United States, what they're doing is they're trying to fight it in the United States, and we have to fight it here, is that they bring in the subjective questionnaires into the school system that target children in the schools. And then they're trying to do it in Victoria at the moment, testing of preschool children for so-called mental illness. And then what they do is they'll give a subjective test if a child doesn't know how to answer such a test. And if they answer wrongly, or if they try and bring it in the school system in a subjective test, like a questionnaire, maybe 15 or 20 questions, and if the child doesn't answer the way the psychiatrist wants them to answer, they can label and classify your child as mentally ill. They can take your child under this Act. I don't have the sections with me at the moment, but there are pages. They can take your child off you for 14 days to begin with under this proposed bill, and then 3 months periodically after that, on pages 21, 22, 35, 19, 107, 36, 53, 54, 183 to 185, page 190, 191, page 213, 214, 18, 46, 47, 48, 65, 66, 70, 73, 75 to page 77, which means they can take your child off you without your permission for 14 days, and then periodically for 3 months without your permission. If they test the children in the school system, which they're already trying to bring in Victoria, in the United States they've brought it in, they're fighting it, the professional people and the families are fighting it. Then if they try and bring it in West Australia, then they'll do it through the school system. If your child doesn't come up the way they want it to come up, they'll probably label or classify 10 or 20% of Western Australian children as mentally ill, and that will give them a reason to drug them with chemical compounds, because it's all for economic profit, just to justify their job. So they can then take your child off you without your permission, lock your child up. They can potentially sterilise your child. They can drug your child with chemical compounds without your permission. They can give your child ECT, which is electric shock, and they can give your child psychosurgery, which is dangerous, extremely dangerous. And they can do that all without your permission, and you will not be able to get your child, you will not, if they pass this bill, and if they bring the screening into the schools, they will do it, and they will do it probably to about 10% of children, as many children as they can, and even maybe up to 20% of children they will try and take and drug them for economic profit. And that's how evil it is. It's so evil that these people who drafted this bill should be remanded in custody, and they should be locked up with the Royal Commission, and also psychiatrists should be, their work should be suspended, and that they should be also remanded in custody for the duration of the Royal Commission to find out who's murdered who, and their involvement, or anyone's involvement in drafting this bill, because it is so shocking that I've never seen anything like this in my life on a draft bill. Section 210, Chief Psychiatrist and Mentally Impaired Accused Review Board. That's for prisoners who they class as mentally ill. You see, prisoners are worse off. If you're in a prison and you've committed a crime, which is subjective because they jail a lot of people in Western Australia and Australia for a lot of reasons which you think you shouldn't be jailing them. But anyway, but if they classify you as mentally ill, you're actually worse off, because not only are you jailed to deprive of your liberty for some crime, which no one's monitoring anyway, because the courts are just doing this without the public's monitoring. Also, you're worse off if you're in a psychiatric facility in a prison, because not only are you there against your will, or you're there for a crime, you're being drugged against your will as well, and you guarantee that when they try and drug people and they say no, that they just inject them with the drug. So it's not, it's totally political. There's nothing medical about locking people up and forcibly drugging them, or forcibly giving them ECT, or forcibly giving them psychosurgery, or subjecting people to torture. That is torture when you do that to people. They torture people. Psychiatrists, in their practice and their treatments, they torture people and they engage in slavery, and that is exactly what it is. So they're worse off because they're being forcibly drugged and given other barbaric treatments. Cruel and inhumane treatments. They are cruel and inhumane treatments, and they've been doing it for 200 years. And they steal people's assets and money. And it's just horrific what they do. So anyway, this board can sterilise people, sterilisation procedure on a person who has a mental illness, but that you see, the whole problem here is that the conception of mental illness is political and sociological. It's not medical. It's just a label. I could go along and say, oh, I think you're crazy or you're schizophrenic. That's how political it is. I can say to psychiatrists and the chief psychiatrist and the Mental Health Commission, I believe you're absolutely crazy and you're absolutely schizophrenic for drafting this bill and for promoting these procedures and carrying out these procedures and practices on human beings. That you are schizophrenic and then you're totally crazy. And that's how political it is. Because I don't need to be a doctor to do that, do I? I can make it a subjective analysis of their behaviour and what they've written, and I can make a subjective analysis and labelling of their behaviour and of their practices. And that's exactly what I can do. And that's exactly why it's political, because anybody can do it. So anyway, a chief psychiatrist can order the sterilisation of someone, and the mentally impaired accused review board can sterilise people under this draft bill. See, that's eugenics, sterilisation of human beings. Okay, we've got section 154, which is, going back, which is about ECT, but just this part I wanted to read out. That section 155, requirements for ECT, voluntary patient, child between 12 and 18 years of age. So that's in regards to child who has reached 12 years of age, but under the age of 18, has sufficient maturity and understanding to make reasonable decisions about matters relating to him or herself, and that they can consent to their own ECT. But of course a child of the age of 12 is not able to do that because they're just a child. And what they will do is they will get the child and they will just force the child. You know, how does anyone know that the child hasn't been forced to make this decision? When they can force the child involuntary anyway under this proposed bill, that they can take your child away from you and force them involuntary, and that then they can consent to their own ECT, a child of 12 years of age. You know, this is extreme form of child abuse. What they're proposing in this draft mental health bill, Eddie Bartnick and the other people involved, is such horrific child abuse. It is horrific child abuse to even propose this, to do this to children. And these people should be remanded on custody. They're first-class criminals. You know, to even propose to do this to children in writing is so criminal that it's horrific. It's so evil to even suggest this. It is crimes against children. They engaged in crimes against children and other people, because it includes, you know, adults as well. Crimes against humanity, there are laws in Australia about that, crimes against humanity, and that's what they're engaged in, and particularly children. I mean, how alarming is this? So therefore, it can only be done by a medical practitioner. The child is given conformed consent to the psychosurgery, but of course if they're there locked up against the consent of the parent, well, how does anybody know that they're going to give the child consent? This is just child abuse. It's total child abuse. The treating psychiatrist has recommended in writing that the electroconvulsive therapy be performed, and that the chief psychiatrist, the treating psychiatrist, if they're not a child or adolescent psychiatrist, the treating psychiatrist obtain the written opinion of a child and adolescent psychiatrist confirming the recommendation. Well, that's never going to happen. They're just going to do it. Does not have sufficient maturity or understanding to make reasonable decisions about matters relating to him or herself. So this is a child. No, this is actually section 169. This is about psychosurgery now. So, sections 169 of Division 3, the draft mental health bill, and section 170 in particular, requirements for psychosurgery child who is between 12 and 18 years of age with capacity to consent, and has sufficient maturity and understanding to make decisions for him or herself, and it's to be done by mental health tribunal can give approval. So here we're talking about basically giving psychosurgery, psychiatrists giving psychosurgery to children as young as 12, and that's the evidence, section 170, and there's other sections that cover this provision, heaps, and sections 155 which are about giving children as young as 12 electroconvulsive therapy, which is electric shock. So, you know, it's the first class criminals to be doing this, and who would in their right mind treat a child like that? You know, irrespective of what they say about children, what right does any human being have to take a child off the parents and to give them cruel and inhumane treatments and give them treatments which will cause their death potentially, or cause premature death, or result in their health being crippled and their mental health being crippled, and result in the sterilisation of a child, let alone an adult, is just, no human being has a right to sterilise another human being. That's plain eugenics. It's absolute eugenics, and these people should really be locked up for drafting this bill, because it's just so scary that as an experienced phys ed teacher, I'm an experienced phys ed teacher, health education teacher, and I have never seen anything like this in Australia before, Western Australia, and this is very scary. I do not have children of my own, I'm a single woman, but I am very scared for the families and the children of the state of Western Australia because of what they're proposing in this draft legislation. And for the politicians to even entertain passing it is so criminal that they're just covering up all these deaths in psychiatric facilities. They're covering up, this draft. Helen Morton has said publicly that there are certain organisations that are going overboard with their commentary on this legislation. But I've just read this legislation straight from the legislation, from the draft bill for you, sections of it, and that's only a very small part of it. There's lots of other sections that cover in detail more about what I was just talking about. So I'm showing you directly from the draft bill what they're actually wanting to do. How can we? It's a criminal what they want to do. And how can we just? We can't let them get away with this, because there has to be a Royal Commission and there has to be prosecutions as well. How can this go on and on and on, and people dying, and just in one hospital, Fremantle, 1 year, 33 deaths. That's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the absolute tip of the iceberg. I'm telling you, there are thousands of people who they have murdered with their treatments in Western Australia. And it'll be interesting to see the age configuration as well, how many younger people have died. Because I know one woman who was murdered, she was 23 years of age, Bentley Psychiatric facility. They gave her 5 psychiatric drugs and she died. They murdered her. That's a friend of a teacher, the sister of a teacher friend of mine. And 33 deaths in one hospital in 1 year. We'll go back 50 years in all of the hospitals throughout Western Australia. We're looking at thousands of people, thousands. And we want to go across the whole country. You're looking at maybe 100,000 people over the past 50 years. You want to go across the whole world? Well, you're looking at millions of people, millions. And that's just 50 years. And they've been doing it for 200 years. So I'm telling you, they have engaged in genocide and they have created a Holocaust. And that's as a result of about 18 months of research that I've done. And there are about 60 organisations, some historical groups, and including professional people around the world, and particularly in the United States, who are now pushing for to stop the practice of psychiatry. About 60 organisations, and they are families, professional people, victims who have survived their treatments, who are pushing for their practices to be stopped and abolished, and for justice for the victims. How can so many millions of people be murdered around the world? Tens of thousands in Australia, if not at least 100,000, if not more, be murdered, and then there's nothing done. And you got people saying a coronial inquiry, that's going to do nothing. It has to be a full-scale Royal Commission, and there has to be prosecutions. And then the practice of psychiatry has to be abolished. It has to be stopped. How can this go on and on and on? It's just got to stop. The practices have to be abolished. There's no other question. You just can't let people suffer like this. Families suffer. I have to suffer because my brother, what they're doing, they won't stop drugging him. They won't give his money back. They won't give his licenses back. They stopped him having contact with me legally. They stopped me having contact with David legally. How do they get away with just doing this to families and destroying relationships between siblings and family and then the government now is government is threatening me with legal action because I'm talking about these issues, and the government is siding with the criminals. The government is doing this to its citizens because they're all government, taxpayer-funded government employees that are involved in this, and they are using taxpayers' money to try and stop me talking about it, but also covering up for criminals, covering up for people who've murdered people and who've stolen their assets and money and destroying people's lives and stolen their licenses and engaging people in slavery and torturing people. Because it's true, it's exactly what they do.